The amount of things that we had to deal with, almost running out of money a few different times, term sheets blowing up, internal drama.
Hola, soy Alex Galvez y esto es Fundadores, el podcast donde me dedico a tener conversaciones con fundadores de startups latinoamericanas para deconstruir sus experiencias, su historia, sus errores y sus aciertos, y así encontrar los aprendizajes, herramientas e inspiración que tú puedes aplicar en tu día a día. Bienvenido. Hola fundadores, hoy estoy con Brian York, CEO y cofundador de Cubbo, una startup de microfulfillment que ayuda a los e-commerce con inventarios y para que puedan hacer sus entregas más rápido. El episodio de hoy es en inglés. No sabíamos si convenía más en el mal español de Brian o en mi mal inglés, pero al final nos decidimos por el inglés. Brian nació en Colombia, pero fue adoptado por una pareja de estadounidenses y vivió gran parte de su vida en Estados Unidos. Lanzó varias startups y después decidió buscar sus raíces. Fue por eso que se mudó a Colombia, donde empezó Liftit, una startup que creció por varios años y de la cual salió el año pasado para lanzar Cubbo. Espero que disfrute esta plática con nada menos que Brian York. Brian, welcome to Fundadores.
Thanks for having me, Alex. I appreciate it. Excited to be here.
I would love to know more about your dark past, where you were an accountant in Silicon Valley. How's that been useful right now in your entrepreneurial career?
Yeah, definitely. So I started off my career as an accountant in Los Angeles. And a few years into that career, I started my own accounting firm that helped venture capital funds back office and providing accounting services to VCs. And through that experience gave me the exposure to startups. I relocated to San Francisco from Los Angeles and started to work with first-time general partners or partners that were having their second or third funds, but generally younger partners that are just starting off. And I was fortunate enough to be the CFO of Lowercase Capital, which was Chris Sacca's one of his first funds. And through that experience, I was the accountant around the table when the first money was going into Uber and Instagram, and that gave me the exposure of what was happening into tech startups. And I was still in my 20s at the time in San Francisco, and that gave me the urge to completely pivot my career away from accounting and into tech startups, and I haven't looked back. And I made that decision in 2008 to 2009 is when I put down my calculator and I jumped into software development and creating startups. And so, that was early on in my journey.
And why did you start to be an accountant for venture capitalists? I mean, it's not like, why did you choose this niche or how did you find these clients?
Well, a little bit it was luck. There's a lot of people that have, business administration background out of college in the US that their first jobs are into mutual fund accounting or hedge fund accounting through a bigger bank. And so I had a little bit of exposure through that, through State Street Bank in Boston. And then I leveraged that experience to relocate to Los Angeles and then ended up at a CPA firm that was providing accounting services to hedge funds. And so that's kind of a broad industry that a lot of business administration graduates fall into. And then through that was really fortunate to find a little niche within that segment into venture capital funds particularly. And because I was seeing what mutual funds and hedge funds were doing for their back office and accounting, and I had the idea that you could apply these same tactics for venture capital funds, which was a lot easier to manage because VCs will only invest a few times a quarter instead of a hedge fund or a mutual fund that's investing very often, and the accounting is very complicated. And so was able to find a new and emerging trend that was happening 2008 to 2010, and was able to also partner with a partner who at the time was like 15 years older than myself. He had the gray hair, he had the CPA in the background, and was really fortunate to have him take me under his wing And together we started the accounting services business that ultimately provided accounting services to these venture capital firms, primarily in San Francisco.
Interesting. You were at the right place at the right time. And how did you decide to start your first startup that was like a social media for sports fans, right?
Yeah, so I had grown up playing sports my whole life and also attempted to play professional soccer in Barcelona. After playing soccer in college, I went to college in Vermont. After college in Vermont, I went over to Europe in Barcelona, tried to play professional soccer. It didn't go too well, but it was a great experience. And then when I got into my career as an entrepreneur, because my whole life I had been in sports, that gave me the idea of trying to provide a social network for sports fans. At the time, this was 2007, 2008, there was a lot of social applications that were launching or had launched and were still new. And I believe I was one of the first to attempt a social network for sports fans. And I was really fortunate enough to raise a few rounds of funding for the startup. The startup ultimately failed. I definitely learned a lot from that experience. But that's what gave me the idea to focus on sports, the social network because of the timing. And I was a lot younger at the time to try to tackle a B2C platform. So that's what gave me, primarily my background was the inspiration to get into that business.
And what was the most valuable lesson about the failing of this company?
Well, I made a ton of mistakes. Much more than I can count, but the ones that stand out is hiring really fast and hiring people that are very close to you. So I hired my brother, my buddies on my soccer team, some guy I randomly knew through having a few beers with him on the weekend, and it felt great to have everyone in the same room, and it's almost like, very kind of like a social gathering, and, I thought we could build a startup together as well, but that was a big mistake. And I also tried to get involved too much into, as the CEO and co-founder of these companies, especially at the beginning, with Enthuse, my social sports platform, I tried to get involved with way too many decisions and into departments like product and engineering. And I'm pretty good at product or design, but I shouldn't be micromanaging decisions and being able to delegate and trust the team behind those departments to be able to execute.
And how was the process of shutting it down? Do you remember like the debate in your head when you were thinking about shutting it down or keep going?
Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday. So my main problem then was being too married to the idea that, this was my idea and I didn't want to be embarrassed and calling up all the investors or having to, present this to the company that we were shutting down. So I was primarily embarrassed, but I was also stubborn. Because it was my baby, it was my idea, I was going to find a way to make it work. I took out a lot of personal debt myself. My mother also took out a line of credit against her house to keep the business afloat, and this was after a few rounds of venture capital funding. And I did everything I could when it was clear, the writing was on the wall after 2 years, but I kept the company open for another year and a half, trying to not have to deal with the fact that the company was not working. And so I should have shut down the company a lot quicker. And, that was an experience that was embarrassing at the time, but also gave me a lot of experience to become better for the next one.
And what was the next step in your career after shutting it down?
Yeah, so after shutting down Enthuse, it was almost like the next weekend, I went out to Las Vegas with some friends to blow off some steam and to sulk in the shutdown. And I met up with a friend who was the head of mobile at Caesars Corporation, the casino in Las Vegas. And after a night of gambling and having fun, we found ourselves at a bar, kind of having a nightcap, and we're just catching up and shooting the shit. And I found out through his experience of trying to build mobile applications for Caesars, as the head of mobile, they were trying to launch like 10 different mobile applications, B2C applications, internal mobile applications. They had hired a whole bunch of companies to try to develop the front end and the back end, and everyone was struggling to get a mobile application launched, but also to integrate with their systems. And so the amount of money he was telling me he was spending on these apps and the amount of time he was telling me to get these applications to market, I was able to convince him on that same night and through a handshake that to work with me to build a back end that these mobile applications could be developed off of, which integrated with Caesar's systems, which were at the time like Microsoft Dynamic and other CRM systems and ERP. And that basically providing a mobile back-end platform for Caesars to launch more mobile applications. And so that contract was actually $25,000 a month. And I didn't have anything. I had to find a technical partner, and I had to figure out like what that actually meant, because I had no experience developing a mobile backend as a service platform. And so with the customer funding, I was able to convince a technical co-founder, and spent the next few months studying the market, studying other comparables to understand like what I was going to do. And so that ultimately was the second startup, which was called Encore, which was a mobile backend as a service platform. I took that experience and that product, we took that experience and product and productized it for other businesses, other B2B businesses, starting with other casinos. I actually, kept on flying back to Vegas to partner with other casinos because I knew that they were launching other applications. And at the time, this was 2012, 2013, there was a lot of beacon mobile applications that were launching, where basically like you could put like a little beacon underneath a table to make payments, or you could put beacons within the casino to do location-based marketing. And so we created a few beacon apps, a few social apps, all leveraging the back-end infrastructure that we had created for different casinos. And then we actually started to sell that same platform to financial institutions and other B2B enterprises.
And wasn't it like a little bit, like, weren't you tired from your first startup? Wasn't it like a little bit risky to start something new like so soon?
No, and actually, Cubbo is my fifth venture-backed startup, and I've done other small projects in between. I've also founded and managed a small seed venture capital fund. And in between, I've basically taken no time off. And it really comes down to the fact that for me, I'm really excited to work on businesses. I'm addicted to stress. I'm addicted to startups. I love everything about them. It's very exhausting, and there's a lot of ups and downs, but I really enjoy that. And every time I've started a new business, it's because I've seen a great opportunity, and I can't not advance on this opportunity and sit by the sidelines and watch other people innovate while I'm sitting by the pool relaxing. It's just really hard for me to do that.
And what ended up happening with the casino app startup?
Yeah, we ended up selling. That ended up basically because we didn't raise too much money. We raised like a few $100,000 because at the time I was still pretty young in my career and was fresh off the failure. So I was kind of embarrassed to go out and fundraise again. But I was able to put together a few $100,000 and have a nominal exit for the few investors that we had. It was primarily bootstrapped. And towards the end of that business, It ended up mostly being like a consulting firm because we actually ended up taking on the front end development ourselves and we were working on the back end. And so we were basically developing mobile applications off of our own back end. And so that company ended up selling to a larger mobile development software agency, after 18 months of starting that business.
Great. And again, you took no time off, no time to rest, and started your third startup, right?
Yeah, I mean, in between, there's a little bit of time off. It's not like, I actually, between the first and second business, it was literally like a few days, but in between the rest, there's like 1 month, but in that month, I'm like thinking about the new idea. I'm talking to potential investors. I'm doing market research. Perhaps I'm taking like 1 or 2 weeks off of like thinking about nothing, but it is pretty much back to back. So the third startup was a situation where I was trying to develop a project for myself as a non-technical founder. So by that time, I had some pretty good experience as an entrepreneur. I had some good experience of developing software, but doing it not in a non-technical way. I don't code and I don't actually know, what's happening behind the scenes. But I was really frustrated of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars over, millions of dollars in some cases when the project is well funded to develop software, and having, as a non-technical person, having to wait for the software to get launched. Then there's bugs and there's issues with the software, and that whole process is really frustrating as a non-technical guy. So I wanted to develop something that allowed me to see in real time what was happening on the code base. So the initial idea was, as code was getting developed, that there would be a mini stock market. Like as code is getting committed, there'd be green and red flashing lights that say, hey, out of this code commit, 75% has good quality, 25% has bad quality, and here's the reasons why the code commit has bad quality. And that was the idea, just a small little stock market kind of dashboard for me to see in real time what was happening on the code base. And we launched that product, and to my surprise, large engineering teams started to download the product to manage their own technical debt. So it was a good way for large development teams to be able to monitor their internal technical debt. And so I spent the next few years selling to engineers, VP of engineering, CTOs, developer teams, which put me in a really uncomfortable situations every single day because I really had no idea what I was talking about. But I knew the product was good, and I could see through metrics that there was a lot of interest for this product. And so that third startup called Bliss, that was the essence of why we started that startup. And that was launched in San Francisco after, about a month after I had launched Encore. And I did Bliss with the same technical co-founder that I also had started the second company with.
You're originally from Colombia, right?
Yeah. So I was born in Bogota. I was born on the streets of Bogota. My mother was homeless and she abandoned me into an orphanage. And at 2 weeks old, I was adopted, and I grew up in south of Boston, Massachusetts, about 20 minutes south in a town called Norwell, which is on the South Shore, close to the ocean, close to Plymouth and close to Cape Cod. So that was, a pretty awesome experience growing up of, being really fortunate to grow up in a situation that was a lot different from what would have otherwise been if I had stayed in Bogota. And I was the only brown kid in my town. I stood out like a sore thumb. Fortunately, that town is really well educated, and I really never felt discriminated on too much, but I definitely, inside, I always wanted to know, why I was different and what my story was. So I've always had it in my blood to come back and get connected to my roots.
And you have always had this like in the back of your mind, like coming back to Colombia or something like that. But when was the moment when you decided like right now it's the right time, the perfect time to go back to Colombia and to look for my roots?
Yeah, so in 2016, after Bliss, we had sold some of the software off to a company out of New York, and we had kept some of the code to continue to develop code quality tools, which I've been tinkering on ever since through side projects. But basically, that was a time for me in late 2016 to take a little bit of time off, but also start planning for my next adventure. And for me, that was a perfect time in my life to consider moving back down to Colombia. I had felt I had hustled hard enough in San Francisco in the United States through fundraising and developing software companies that I wanted to have a fresh perspective on something new, something outside of the country. And it was a perfect tie-in to go back to my roots in Colombia and start looking for my biological family. And I was old enough and mature enough to take on that responsibility as well. So in late 2016, I started to take random trips down to Bogota for the first time, basically, since I was adopted, to try to meet with other entrepreneurs, to try to look at what's happening in the startup ecosystem. And through those trips, I had a first glance at what ended up becoming Liftit, which is a truck delivery platform. But at the time, I had a few different ideas. I had just had a child. It was my first child. I had like a baby subscription idea that I wanted to potentially launch in Bogota. I had this truck delivery platform, and I had another startup or two that I had considered to launch in Bogota. And from San Francisco, I actually launched all of these ideas through Twitter and Facebook. I think those are great platforms to test idea and to validate on a small scale. If people, will sign up to your waiting list or will, start to follow and engage with some of the stuff that you're posting. And actually, while I was still in San Francisco with Liftit, the truck delivery platform, through Facebook, just through a simple marketing picture, I was able to get orders that same day that we posted that picture to Facebook. And that first day of creating the Facebook page, we had 3 orders in Bogota to do a B2C truck delivery. So basically the first iteration of Liftit was on-demand trucking for individuals. Like, for instance, if you're at Home Center and bought a grill and you needed to bring it home to your apartment, it was an opportunity for you to do that through technology and get a truck driver on demand in Bogota to show up and at the store pick up the grill and deliver it to your apartment. And so through that experience, we were able to get 3 sign-ups the first day. And my business partner, Felipe Betancourt, was in Bogota. And as the orders were coming in, he was running out on the street, recruiting truck drivers. He was jumping in the truck himself, executing on the orders. And we were both learning about the market in real time because we had no experience on supply chain, no experience with truck deliveries. And so it was one of those things where we tested it through social media and we started to make money on day one. And from there, Liftit just started to scale.
And I know you had like an amazing growth in Liftit. When was the time you felt like you had product market fit? Was there like an exact time that you can remember?
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic around product market fit for supply chain services, businesses that are applying technology. This was a topic that the founders at Liftit talked about a lot. It was discussed, like, did we have product fit or not? For me, I always thought we had product fit. I firmly believe that we always had it because on day one, we were getting orders. We were making money since day one. We were increasing revenue month over month. We quickly pivoted to B2B. I did not want to develop another B2C application. And I think, the lifetime value of a person needing a truck is very small. Like, how often do you need a truck every year? Maybe once or twice. So the pivot to B2B was pretty easy. So we started to partner with local businesses like Home Center, so businesses always were keen to work with us to give us truck deliveries. And so getting back to my hypothesis or my belief is that if you're continuing to get truck delivery orders and you're seeing that the logistics teams at these shippers really need the solution, that's kind of like service market fit. There's always requests for Liftit to do services, while the truck delivery, it's like the platform may have been always in development, and the way shippers used the technology was always slow adoption. Then over time they were using it more and more. I always believed that there was always service market fit, which ultimately is kind of product market fit, even though a lot of the time like we would start working with shippers and the person actually using the product was Liftit itself to help these shippers make quicker truck deliveries.
How was this stage of hyper growth? Because I know you really soon started in Colombia and then opened Mexico and Brazil and a lot of places in Latin America. How do you know when is the right time to open another country?
Yeah. Great question, and a little bit of it is nuanced again to doing supply chain services. And at the time, this was 2017, 2018, before Latin America really got hot. And so right now, Latin America is clearly hot. There's a lot of venture funding coming in. It's easier to make like hyper growth decisions, whether it's expansion or making hires. Obviously, if the metrics are there, if there's revenue to support it and the unit economics are there, it's easier to take bets today than it was a few years ago. So basically, in 2017, we spent a lot of time fundraising. I didn't know anybody in Colombia. I only knew my business partner, Felipe Betancourt, and then eventually Angel Celis, who joined us quickly in the early as a third co-founder. From there, we started to make a few hires, but I didn't really know anybody. So our kind of go-to-market was through fundraising. And so in Bogota, I met with thousands of angel investors, and in Colombia as well. And at the end of 2017, we had about 84 angel investors who invested in Liftit, doing tiny checks, 5,000, 25,000, 50,000. And we were able to put together a seed round. And so through that experience, I was really excited because it was amazing that Colombia had so much support for the startup ecosystem. I mean, yeah, there was a lot of questions around why your valuation was this and what's a safe and why are you using a safe, and can I see your 3-year projections when you're just starting off, and it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But that comes with the new ecosystem. And so I was really excited to see the support and the depth of investors in Colombia. And basically, to get back to your question, in 2018, we knew that we needed to raise a second round of funding, a Series A, and it was going to be hard to do that through Colombia at the time. Perhaps you could do it today, but at the time there was really no Series A investors. And so we knew we needed to look to Mexico or Brazil or the US to attract Series A investors. And 2018 was still, I remember fundraising for that, for Liftit, and talking to investors in the US. And 90% of the investors didn't have Latin America on their radar, or like their benchmark for Latin America startups was way off to kind of what the reality was. Today is a phenomenal time. Actually, 90% of the funds in the US do have an appetite now for Latin America. So it's much different times in a short period of time. And so in 2018, we knew we needed to replicate the business model to get into Mexico City, to be able to attract larger investors to support us for our second round of funding, or Series A. So that was the decision behind expanding so quickly, was to attract and to be able to execute on the Series A funding. I remember having initial conversations with investors from Mexico City, And they told me, sounds interesting, Liftit sounds interesting, but let us know when you start doing business in Mexico City, or let us know when you get here, like thinking that we were just all talk. And basically the next week, my wife and I packed our bags and we flew out to Mexico City. My wife at the time was the head of sales of Liftit, and we both launched Liftit in Mexico City. Had never been to that city before, coming there for the first time, but primarily making that decision to attract investors. So the next time I talked to those funds, I was able to do it in person, actually making money in Mexico City. So then they took me more seriously in the fundraising process, which ultimately helped us to raise our second round of funding.
That's a great story. And when did you decide to move to Mexico? Like, I don't know, you were talking with a lot of funds and they told you, yeah, you decided like in a second, or it was like a couple of weeks, or?
Yeah, so the seed round for Liftit took all of 2017. We basically like closed it in December 2017. And the very next day I started to fundraise for the Series A, have preliminary conversations with funds from Mexico, from funds from the US. And so, after a few months of having those conversations, and it was clear that we needed to be able to do truck deliveries outside of Colombia as well. And a lot of people were kind of inferring to do that in Mexico because of its market size and its location to the US. And so after a few months of having those conversations, we made the decision to pack our bags and move to Mexico in March of 2018. And by May of 2018, we had made a small acquisition, and we had met with new customers, new shippers. We had started to recruit truck drivers, and we did our first truck delivery about less than 60 days after relocating to Mexico, which is pretty good because in Mexico, it takes a lot of time to open a bank account, to get formalized as a corporation. All of that took the same amount of time it took us to actually make money. And so, within a few months, we moved out to Mexico in March, and we stayed there for the rest of the year.
And what was the most difficult thing about scaling Liftit so fast?
In general, there was kind of a lot of the same mistakes I actually made on my first startup, which was hiring really quickly. This time I didn't know anybody, because if you remember that the first startup, I hired all my soccer buddies and my brother, and it was kind of like a social event. This one was a little bit different, where I didn't know anyone, and so Liftit was clearly growing on the revenue side and the truck delivery side, and so we spent a lot of time recruiting and having a first conversation, screening call, and in 5 minutes, if it felt good, we would make an offer on that same conversation to start working with us the next day or as quickly as they could, without doing references, without really having other people on the team meet with the person. I remember myself as the CEO just reaching out to someone on LinkedIn, have a few chat with them on LinkedIn, a quick screen call through WhatsApp. 10 minutes later, I'm making an offer without even telling the other founders that I'm doing this, just because of the pressure of having to have someone on the team to be able to continue to delegate. So, that ended up being a mistake. The amount of people that were coming in and out of Liftit was way off the charts, and that was definitely, a lot of that was my own fault. But also kind of, through that also was kind of the culture of Liftit for a while, especially in the beginning of hiring fast and then having to fire fast as well, which created a lot of money we had to spend for severance. And, so that was a big, bottleneck and challenge that we had in scaling so fast. And also because the three founders didn't have much experience in supply chain or logistics, or developing fast-growing startups in Latin America. And so understanding the business took a long time. Even after 4 years of being at Liftit, it's still, I remember to the very end, I was still learning things that were pretty basic in supply chain and logistics. But for me, that's actually quite exciting to be able to dive into a new market for the first time, have a completely fresh perspective on the market. And but that was also a challenge of learning the business, not only for myself, but the other founders, having to, basically the whole first year of doing Liftit, we spent a lot of time understanding the market, talking to industry experts, and getting a super fast education in supply chain.
Yeah, and about you were saying about when you left Liftit. How was the debate in your head, and why did you decide to leave Liftit to start Cubbo?
Yeah, so about a year ago, we did a Series B financing round led by a private equity firm. And at the time, Liftit had over 100 investors, is mostly profitable on its operations in the 5 countries it was performing truck delivery services at. And it was a good opportunity with the new lead investor to transition out as they're coming on, and they actually had great access to management, which they've worked with for 20 years in other truck delivery platforms in other countries. And the private equity firm had really great experience of taking other truck delivery platforms in the US from being first money in, scaling and taking it to IPO. And so that was great momentum that was brought on to Liftit, amazing strategic partner, and at the same time was an opportunity for me to transition out as they brought in some new management. And at the time, truck deliveries is super complicated. It's an amazing opportunity. Liftit's the clear leader in last mile trucking in Latin America. But along the way, and actually one of the challenges which I didn't mention is the cash flow management of doing truck deliveries, because basically the amount of money coming in and out of the company is super material, and it puts a lot of stress on the business itself. So for instance, Liftit has to pay truck drivers pretty quickly, but they have to wait a fair amount of time to get paid from the shippers. And all of that, sounds like pretty non-trivial, but is extremely difficult to manage. And as Liftit was expanding into new countries, new cities, over 100 shippers we were working with, there was just a lot of room for first-time founders in this space to make really big mistakes. And thankfully we didn't, but some of these things we had to manage could have put the company at jeopardy overnight. And so it was phenomenal to, along with the Series B, bring in such global talents to be able to manage what Liftit is and will become as it continues to scale to be the leading in last mile truck delivery.
And how did it feel to leave your company, leave your baby?
Yeah, I mean, by that time, this was just, last year. I had been in startups for most of my career, and I'm old enough to be mature about the situation. And moreover, actually, I was very excited to what we've been able to build in 4 years. I'm very proud of what we are able to achieve. I mean, the amount of things that we had to deal with, almost running out of money a few different times, term sheets blowing up, internal drama. There was the first time the 3 founders had worked together. The other 2 founders are a lot younger than me. That it was their first time going through scaling such a startup. So there's so many ways that could have gone wrong, but we were able to pull it together and find a way to persevere. So I'm super proud of what we were able to build at Liftit. It was by far my most successful startup by a landslide, and really excited I'm really bullish and long on the business. I continue to be a material common stock holder, and I'm very, very long on the business and Liftit's opportunity to continue to win the market. Yeah,
and I mean, you are already doing a different idea that is like really promising. I've seen a lot and read a lot about dark kitchens and how is it changing a lot
because of the delivery, their kitchens are growing a lot, and it's changing the food startups. But could you tell us a little bit more about Cubbo? How did it started, and how did you came with the initial idea?
Yeah, so during the pandemic last year, now I live 2 hours outside of Bogota in a small town that's in the department of Nimaima. And, basically there's like 500 people in this town that I'm living in. And so, but last year I was in Bogota in an apartment during the pandemic, and I was able to see firsthand in this massive city that has 11 million people, what distress the pandemic had caused on commercial real estate. So there was a WeWork building across the street from me that went out of business. I mean, there was a lot of WeWork buildings in Bogota, but there was this one specific building that they had to shut down. There were strip malls across the street that were shutting down. There was apartments up for rent. As I looked out over the city landscape, every week there was more signs coming up for rent. I myself knew I was moving out of Bogota and looking to go more rural. And so for me, it was super clear that city space is going to be transformed, and it was being transformed in real time. And so I could see the opportunity that, the space exists, cities aren't going anywhere. There's still going to be a ton of population in the city, but there's going to be an opportunity for new and emerging industries to take over this space. And so that's kind of the essence of the idea for Cubbo, is to transform city space throughout Latin America. And so as I transitioned out of Liftit slowly over last year, I took a little bit of time off. I finished construction at this house. I sat by the pool for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, and got really bored with that, and was super excited to take this idea of transforming city space and to try to get back to market, do another startup, and take advantage of that. So I definitely thought of cloud kitchens, but subjectively or personally, food really scares me. I didn't want to start delivering food or having to worry about burritos going cold or any of that. And so I had always been interested in the self-service market. The self-storage market. So I myself still have self-storage today. I pay about $500 a month for my stuff that's in San Francisco and in Boston and Vermont. I have my stuff all over the United States, and I'm paying monthly for that. And I have no visibility through technology to be able to quickly say, hey, sell this, donate this. I want to have these pair of skis out and delivered back to me. There's no way of doing that unless I go to the self-storage facility in San Francisco and sort through all of that myself physically. So I've actually been thinking about the self-storage space for over a decade, actually. Ever since I first started to get into tech startups, I've really been intrigued on the space. And so that was kind of the first iteration of Cubbo. Around Christmas time, or mid-December, I launched a landing page for Cubbo, and it was basically all self-storage services in Bogota. And so I was able to, I started to get orders very much like Liftit. As soon as, through Facebook and through this landing page, I started to get self-storage services in Bogota. I started to execute on those services, started to make money, and I started to fundraise for this market as well. And quickly I realized, through having these investor calls, that I love the self-storage market, super intriguing, is very interesting, but to actually be an entrepreneur, innovating in the space wasn't so exciting. So I quickly learned that. I'm I don't see myself doing this for the next 5 to 10 years, doing self-storage in Latin America. So I used that fundraising experience and actually making money in the space. And it was interesting, but I didn't really love doing it. And I quickly iterated the company to using that same urban warehouse space, but instead of self-storage for B2C, I wanted to use it for to manage e-commerce inventory for brands and retailers. and create micro fulfillment spaces for brands and retailers. And so that's quickly what Cubbo became, like overnight in December and January a few months ago. And that was kind of the essence of Cubbo.
And what do you think are some of the advantages that you have, like being a very experienced entrepreneur that knows how to raise money, how to hire, what's like the main difference between starting a company right now with all those experience and your first startup?
Yeah, so fundraising this time around has been a lot smoother. The pre-seed came together pretty quickly from people who have supported me in the past, who knew about me. By the time I did Cubbo, I had done a few startups in the U.S. I had raised this, I had managed the small seed fund, which I didn't really talk about too much yet, and I had done Liftit, which was fast growing. A lot of people know Liftit throughout Latin America. So this time around with Cubbo, it has been pretty straightforward to round the investors together. Where Liftit, it took me 12 months, thousands of meetings, thousands of no's. I was finally able to, rally to some investors on the cap table. This time, there was primarily yeses in a short amount of period of time. Granted, it's also a very amazing time to be an entrepreneur in Latin America. I think it's just kind of generally a lot easier anyways, even if you're a first-time entrepreneur. So if you kind of put those two facts together, getting to market with the pre-seed round that we recently closed, which was a $2 million pre-seed round, was pretty smooth, but also executing efficiently in the supply chain space again, because at its essence, Cubbo is a real estate opportunity startup. We're going to be transforming space throughout Latin America. But right now, the wedge that we're focused on is micro-fulfillment for retailers. And so we are looking for urban warehouses to transform, to be able to store and manage inventory, and to be able to pick and pack and execute, and to be able to fulfill in the same day. And so because I had just spent 4 years doing truck delivery services in the same market, this time around, I know supply chain, I know investors in Latin America and the US, and I have worked with a lot of people in the past. So actually my co-founder for Cubbo was not someone I worked with at Liftit, but actually had exposure to through Liftit, because he was a customer that Liftit occasionally worked with in Mexico City, because Josu Gertabay, my co-founder of Cubbo, had a traditional warehouse outside of Mexico City that needed truck deliveries occasionally. And so it was a customer that Liftit had exposure to, which I also had exposure to. So, that was another reason why I was able to partner with Josu quickly. I knew him. So that was just kind of like the puzzle pieces came together a lot quicker because of the timing and the experience I had innovating in Latin America.
And what do you want to do differently in Cubbo than in Liftit?
Yeah, some of the hypotheses are, it's not that I might want to do something differently. There's a lot of going to be TBDs. So with Liftit, we expanded really quickly despite all odds. Basically, everyone said, don't expand beyond Colombia. It's a bad mistake. We're talking to potential investors and existing investors, or just the market or other customers. And everyone's like, just focus on Colombia. But we chose to expand. Yes, we saw what was happening with Rappi down the street, and their expansion was successful. We got a little bit of taste of that, but it also, we took some well-educated guesses based on the metrics we were seeing, and we made the choice to launch new markets, and it ended up being very strategic for Liftit. This time around, the intention is to expand super quick as well. We're operating in Mexico City and Colombia. It's our intention to go to other markets as well. But I'm going to be less loose about it this time, and really make sure that the unit economics are there, that the cash runway is there. Fortunately, actually, Cubbo already has profitable operations. And if we're able to maintain that while growing top line revenue by the end of the year, then yeah, and also be able to prove out unit economics, then yes, expansion will probably happen. But if there's any hiccups there, then I want to be a little bit more hesitant to expanding. But to get back to actually one of the mistakes that I made in my first startup and also with Liftit with hiring, this time around with hiring, we're going to take it a lot slower. I'm going to get everyone else involved into the process. And fortunately, Josu, my business partner, is like the extreme opposite of me. He's very detailed oriented, very slow and methodical in his decision making and his processes. And so we're definitely a good combination where I can meet a lot of people really quick. And then he loves to interview and also, do take home tests and projects for potential hires, while also introducing to the rest of the team the potential hire. So thus far, our hires are all AAA, super solid individuals, and we're going to try to maintain that, as we grow the business quickly.
Great. We're gonna pass to the final part. It's the questions are small. Answers don't need necessary to be so. What books, blogs, podcast, or any content do you recommend?
Yeah, so unfortunately, I'm not a big book reader. I always would love to have time to sit down and really sink my teeth into a book, but I don't. And so any free time that I have, I always go to podcasts or go to YouTube. A lot of that is really boring and it's very like because I don't have much warehouse experience. Now I'm spending a lot of time on YouTube going to micro fulfillment and warehousing and e-commerce fulfillment, and I'm basically giving myself the education in the space. And so that's where I spend a lot of my time. But I also like podcasts. I like the 20-minute VC with Harry, and I love the Jason Kalkanis podcast. I try to stay up to date on that to see what's happening globally with startups. But a lot of the stuff that I'm listening to is super boring, and basically I'm just I'm trying to teach myself about the industries that I'm innovating, because it's the first time that I'm with every startup that I've never had experience previously, and now I need to teach myself as quickly as possible about the market.
Yeah. What belief or habit have you changed in the last 5 years that has done your life better?
Yeah, so it actually was more than 5 years ago. I think basically ever since I've been an entrepreneur, I stopped watching television. So I do not watch any TV. Occasionally, maybe once every 3 months, I'll sit down to watch a movie with my wife. But even that's hard to do. And so if I'm going to take some downtime, it's going to be, taking a walk with the family, being outside, exercising, or, just relaxing and having a talk with the family. But I found TV to be extremely wasteful, but also allows me, if I'm going to waste time like that, I'm going to try to, waste it on being on watching podcasts and teaching myself about new markets and trying to, be a better entrepreneur.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Watching TV is a massive loss of time, and of energy as well. What do you believe that other people disbelieve?
Well, there's a new movement right now to a lot of people, and a lot of funds are moving to Miami. From San Francisco, from Austin, New York, everyone's migrating to Miami, which is really cool. I think that's, I'm actually going to Miami myself to fundraise for Cubbo's seed round in a couple of weeks, and also try to get vaccinated, which I'm excited. I think Miami is a great city, but I actually think beyond that, the next wave is people in the US and probably Europe as well, but I don't have much exposure to that. I think there's going to be a big migration away from the US into other countries. Basically what I did 4 years ago, I think the quality of life is much better in other countries. I mean, not necessarily Colombia, but even though it's been an amazing experience for me here, but there's a ton of other countries, a ton of other regions that are untouched, amazing lifestyle, Now people are working remote. I'm working in a town that has 500 people in it. I'm using a little amplifier box here to be able to do this podcast. I'm not the best setup yet, but I'm working on it. But my point is, I believe that there's going to be a huge immigration or migration away from the US, and people are going to be moving away. Right now it's Miami, but the next is going to be Colombia or Argentina, or somewhere, in another emerging market. And so that's one of my beliefs.
Yes, and with this pandemic, remote work is just gonna get bigger, and everybody is like, right now everybody knows it works. What founder of Latin America do you admire, and you think we should have on the podcast?
Well, I know one of the things I admire about this guy is his use of time. And he's super picky, heads down guy. That's even hard for me to get in contact. So I would love to, maybe he'll be able to do the podcast. But the person who I admire the most is Florian Hadebuck, the co-CEO of Loft out of Sao Paulo. He's just obviously his stats are speak for itself. But I've been fortunate to have Florian as a investor in Cubbo and Liftit. And this guy is a very kind of quiet guy, heads down, and just an execution machine. So every time that I, my ego gets built big on myself, and I think I'm executing amazing, then I just hear Florian comes out of nowhere and is doing 100 times better than me, which is then, gets me more excited to get heads down and try to keep pace with him. So he's just an execution machine, but he's also very helpful. So I remember, and my background is in math and as an accountant, and with Liftit, I remember doing because he was a seed investor in Liftit, and for Series A, I had to work on cohorts for the cohorts for the truck drivers, and I had no idea what that was, and because this was my first marketplace I had ever done with Liftit. And Florian, I remember spending half a Saturday morning and into the afternoon, him teaching me about cohorts, him sharing his spreadsheets, him going through the equations with me to make sure that I understand, and then following up with me to make sure that I actually do know what I'm talking about. So he's a person who I admire the most.
Great. Brian, where can we learn more about you and about Cubbo?
Well, I'm super active on LinkedIn. I'm also becoming pretty active on podcasts. I have a few more this week. I try to I'm very accessible. Anyone can reach out to me, brian@cubbo.com. I always try to respond. The shorter the message, and the quicker the person can get to the point, I'm most likely going to respond. So a lot of the times that I don't respond, it's just the message is way too long, or the entrepreneur never gets to the point. So through email or LinkedIn is an easy way to get in contact with me. And then, I've done a few podcasts already for Cubbo, and I'm going to be pretty active with this type of content. So that's another way for people to learn about me and the business.
Great. Brian, thank you so much for your time. Time is the most valuable asset. We can always make more money, but never make more time.
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah, no, thanks for your time, Alex. This was fun, and thanks for having me.
Disfruté platicando con Brian. Tiene una historia interesante y es un gran emprendedor. Escríbeme para saber si te gustó este episodio en inglés y si deberíamos de experimentar con cosas similares. Mi filosofía es crear fundadores en español, pero creo que hacer algunas entrevistas en inglés nos abre las puertas para tener grandes emprendedores de Brasil, Estados Unidos y alguno que otro de alguna otra parte del mundo con una historia interesante. Espero que hayas disfrutado este experimento y no olvides dejarnos una review en Apple Podcast. En serio, nos ayuda mucho a seguir creciendo. Hasta la próxima.